we've known each other for a few years now, and we both have a great love of the English countryside. And for you, it's been a great inspiration for your art. And Cleve Hill has been a site where has been the scene of much of your painting. But events there in recent years, with the burning and dumping of cars, has caused you to reappraise or rethink about relationship with place, and to move your art in different directions. So we've come now to the Guildhall in Gloucester, where you've got an exhibition called Pyromania, which is, in a sense, a celebration of the beauty that can come out of destruction when people do what look to be really quite traumatic and terrible things to the countryside, out of which you produce this rather wonderful exhibition of photographic work. I wonder if you could just tell us something a little about the beginning of the process and the shock to you of first encountering these burnt-out cars in your favourite site.
Right, Pat. Well, you were quite right. It was one of the main sites that I enjoyed painting. And when I found the first car embedded in a gorse bush on the hill, and then a second one, also in a gorse bush, having burnt the plant rather badly, I realised that I needed to do something about it. I felt so enraged by the experience. So I first of all walked around and found further images, some close up to trees, others in the open on the common.
But they didn't jump out at you immediately, did they? These images? Your first response was one of anger,
yes, about
the defacing of a
and the anger got in the way
site.
of anything, what I could do, anything creative with it. I was so enraged that I wanted to get a revenge for what had happened here.
Because I guess most people confronted with that sort of situation would walk away in disgust.
Well, I did myself, of course, initially. But I realised I couldn't paint it either because it was too awful to paint. So I walked away, and I had to revisit the site a number of times until I found something for the first time that excited the creative aspect. And I realised I couldn't do it with a brush. The only answer was to use a camera, because it's an immediate response.
Let's walk across here to this image, which became what I think you've called the pivotal point in your relationship with these wrecks.
And that occurred on the bonnet of this car, this BMW. So you'll have a look at the image that I took of it.
Had you had any experience of working with photography prior to this?
I had, but not in this context of fire. It was fairly... some of it was transformative work, but this was quite exceptional.
And now we have one of the largest images in the exhibition.
Yes, I decided to make some larger prints, while the other images are relatively small, but we started to make some larger ones for those that really impressed me. The first thing I noticed about this, Pat, was the orange streak across the bonnet. I was very impressed with that. I couldn't explain why, and I didn't immediately, on that first occasion of spotting it didn't click in and register as something that I would need to record. It was only on about the third or fourth visit that it really caught hold. But one reason was there was a hollow on the bonnet filled with water, and it disguised this limb here. I call it a limb because I see it as a leaping figure. But when that dried out, I saw the limb, and it tied up with this great diagonal orange streak across, and immediately it was deer leaping, which reminded me of cave painting.
Yes.
And so Lascaux Leap seemed an obvious type.
And isn't it interesting that now that you've blown this one up, it's so obviously a Lascaux Leaps piece. Its association with cave painting is so strong. And of course, taken in this particular view, one has no sense that in fact what one is looking at is the remains of a burnt-out car.
I think this is where compositional matters enter, where I had to trim the edges right down so the bonnet wasn't visible. I didn't want any extraneous or peripheral parts getting in the way of the central image. So by trimming it, it concentrates on the street.
Yes, and already you see, interestingly, you've started to talk about a relationship with the subject matter And that's something I'd like to pick up with you if we can perhaps walk across to some of the images at the far end. Because you very importantly said that first of all, there's a pivotal point where you're able to overcome your sense of outrage about the situation and then see something creative in it.
Right.
There's a second stage, which you've talked to me about, which you've described as having a conversation with the subject matter. And I think the really interesting way into that discussion is to have a look at the image here, where you've actually got a face.
I think this one was the pivotal point of change, when my rage became something other. I thought I saw two eyes. They're in fact the shock absorbers of the car. I've removed again anything outside that image, so it's concentrated entirely on the face. So we have the two eyes, a nose clearly defined, the bonnet blew off and the girder system remained, and then an open mouth with broken teeth with the old radiator grill. And it was shouting at me, "This is how I feel when I'm burnt." It seemed to be speaking a language I understood. So it's a mirror image of what I felt within. And so the anger suddenly transformed to something close to euphoria. I felt a kind of wave of happiness, that the anger had been controlled and was no longer, what you call it, it didn't engender bitterness and a feeling of impotence. Suddenly, a new generative spirit, a creative
I'm going
spirit.
to pick up later on, not at this point, but I could see the question at this point, this whole notion of being able to see these things in the first place, and it's so obvious to us now, looking at this image, that is in fact a face, but how many people would have seen that as a face, just walking past it? Very few, I doubt. And it's also a sort of multi-dimensional face, isn't it? Because the face itself has different moods. There is a mood of anger.
It could be grimacing. It certainly is grimacing. It's a fearsome smile, teeth exposed.
Yes, it's also mocking. From certain angles, it's mocking.
Yes.
It's from other angles, it's angry.
It has a hint of a laugh.
Yes.
However you wish to see it, it's there.
So I think that's the important point, isn't it? It's reflecting back to the viewer, the person who's looking at it.
Yes. It's
the
a mirror.
feelings that they have
It's
at
a
the
mirror.
time. Yes.
And it's showing my face in a slightly different form.
Yes.
Transformed. It's a transformative subject, isn't it?
And then having established that, if you like, relationship with the wreck, you then started to see other images quite readily emerging, and I think we look at the two skull
Well,
images.
something loosened up at that point, seeing one we called the Inferno, that's the large face.
Yes.
I started to find large heads on here's a door, and we have a great skull here with an eye and a long vertebrae moving in. And I found that very exciting. It's the first really large image I found on the side of a vehicle.
Yes.
And that didn't come immediately. I must have walked past that at least 3-4 times. And one day, after seeing the one we were discussing previous to this, it suddenly appeared. It was there.
Yeah.
I
And
was very surprised
this
at that.
particular image has this wonderful ambiguity, because you see a skull. I actually see in that image a dolphin. And here it's a dolphin in the act, if you like, of jumping through the water. Here's the fin, here's the nose of the dolphin, and here's the eye.
Well, I'm
So
glad
I see something else in
I'm
that
glad you
image.
brought this up, because we've had a lot of people coming and telling me different things. Each person projects their own image
Exactly,
onto the
yes.
thing that has been recorded. How this happens, I'm not sure, but that's how it functions.
And I'm attuned to dolphins because I have a daughter who is obsessed with them and constantly painting them. So I'm bombarded with images of dolphins, and so naturally I project a dolphin onto
But talking about dolphins takes us to the sea. If we come across the other side, on the same vehicle, on the rear door and the rear panel, we have a long beastie from the sea, a great whale. And that again missed me. I just didn't see it. I have to admit to tweaking something, that's the word I like to use. I put a very small little mark there to represent an eye. I hadn't really spotted it until I put an eye on it. So I did notice there was a gaping line through here.
Yes, and again, so obviously a whale. I mean, that
whale, that's what suggests whale, where the mouth position
that's a less ambiguous picture, because now that you've pointed it out, it is so obviously a whale, and there's not much else that you can project onto that.
Not so,
but if you see it at all, and again, my point is that very few people will have seen that.
Well,
the other interesting thing about that image is that the power of the image itself, the whale that comes out of the bodywork of the car, detracts from all the other superfluous information, if you like, for example, about the wheel. The wheel becomes unimportant. It doesn't matter.
On the other hand, Pat, there's another view here. A lot of children said, who came to this exhibition one day, "Oh, I like this one, mister, because you've got the wheel on and you've got other parts of the car. We can see more of the cars." For me, that is more interesting, a young girl said. So that's an aspect I hadn't considered.
Yes. I mean, this is apart from having looked at the face over here, this is the first of the figurative images that give you an indication that we're actually looking at a burnt-out car.
Can we stop a sec?
We're now moving on to a different part of the exhibition, and we've looked at images which are quite obviously parts of wrecked cars, but we've looked at images where the association is not obvious. Now we're going to look we're going to go back to, if you like, things which are highly mechanical, but which have some sort of figurative qualities. And this is one of the few where you've actually had to do just a little bit of manipulation to bring out what you wanted to demonstrate in this particular image, which you've called Blitzkrieg.
Yes. What is particularly interesting to me in this image was the fact that it was inside a car. What I'd found in all the vehicles up to this point was total chaos. The burn had really turned and twisted everything so much there was nothing coherent, it was chaos. But in this case, the small round part of the carburettor, I suspect, had a single shining eye, and I found another bulb, that's what it was, lying here. So I put it in alongside, and I found a piece of twisted metal and laid it out as a mouth. Then I found the caliper clipped, which was lying here. I'm not using correct technical terms for motoring perhaps, but I centered it under the circle and another piece here, so we have now a little figure.
So in a sense, this is now an image of what you might call an improvised sculpture, isn't it?
Yes, you could see it.
Scrap metal sculpture that's been improvised on the spot and then photographed, a bit like the way Andy Goldsworthy creates his leaf patterns in the landscape and photographs those.
And we have another level here because it reminded me so much of my childhood and seeing early aerial photographs of, say, Kessel or one of the German cities on the Rhine, with thousands of little factories and so on had been in the Blitz.
Yes.
So it was English bombing on German cities. And this is an arterial network of roads.
And in fact, the further away you come from that, the more it looks like an aerial photograph of a Blitz landscape.
Yes, I think so.
So there's a sort of dimensionality moving backwards and forwards towards that image.
Yeah, so that was quite a transformative moment, except I had to jiggle with it.
But it's a situation of where you've actually used features of the sort of the mechanical features of a car to actually generate an image. And there's another example of that here, which again, when we look at it in the way that you've managed to capture it here, it's so obvious, but I bet it took a long time before that emerged as the car looking back at you through the camera lens. Well, so tell us about that one and how you, at what point you actually recognise that as being quite clearly what it's shown to be in that image.
Well, it ended up as a camera, but certainly in the first sighting it was a door, lock, minus the handle. I just noticed this shape. But the curious thing about that shape, it's so common, isn't it, as a camera form, because camera forms very often have rounded corners. Not all of them, but certainly some of the early ones do. So that was the first thing I noticed. And I looked in more closely, and I had something of a shock, an inner shiver, because I found an eye looking at me. And that was really rather disturbing. The more I came into this, I noticed a pupil, upper lid and a lower lid.
Yes.
And it was looking
It's
straight
quite
at me.
definitely
And that
there,
was
isn't it?
extraordinary. I didn't tinker with that. That was there. That must have been where the shaft would have been fitted in. It may be a loose form of holding the shaft. I don't know, but nevertheless, that's what I was given.
Yeah.
And so it became the camera's eye.
And it must have been another sort of watershed, if you like, in terms of your relationship with these wrecks, because it marks another level of relationship, doesn't it?
Yes, it's again what I call transformative. It's one thing becoming something else. And that's what's so strange about fire. Of course, does this to material, doesn't it? It turns it. It turns metal and twists it into most strange contortions.
Yes.
And here we've got the fire doing very interesting things outside the camera area,
which you've captured in a different image.
Yes, absolutely.
But now that we're actually at this point of the exhibition, I think we ought to look at what many people would regard as perhaps the most evocative image in the entire collection, the one that you've chosen to call Homage to Turner. And you've got it here in two different forms. Well, you've got a smaller image and a larger one.
Take the larger one first, or
yes, let's have a look at the larger one first, because they really do change.
It's a very dark,
quite significant
somber image. It may be a little problematic being able to capture this on camera because of the reflection, but the great leaping wave here against the sky, and what appears to be a seagull flying against it, and a burning city along the shore, is counterbalanced by this wonderful white broken wave here. And it's hard to imagine how fire could create water, but it certainly seems that that's what's happened in this case. A truly transformative moment.
I find, I mean, it's a very powerful image, but for me, its association with Turner is at its strongest when it's in its smaller
Well, if
version
we take it here, which is much paler and lighter in tone and colour, the Turner colours are more obvious. He does tend to go towards blues and the opposite, the orange. So we've got the orange fire here, haven't we? And the blueness of the waves around here.
But it's the mood of that image, isn't it, that's more Turner, I think.
Yes,
it's the mood of it.
Right. I think this is more dramatic. But,
yes, and I believe many people who've seen that have also just quite
they recognise
it, made that association.
Yes, they always say, "Oh yes, Turner."
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when they say, "Well, how did you do it? How did you paint this?" And they didn't recognise it as a photograph. This is the interesting thing about it. And of course, when I saw the first print of it, I had to admit it was as close to a painting as one could imagine, really.
That actually leads us, I think, quite well on to the next theme that I'd like to explore with you, because in a sense that was almost a one-moment opportunity to capture that image at that particular time. Because if we move across to these images here of shorelines, they illustrate very well the whole changing nature of your subject matter, because we're dealing with wrecked cars, burnt and exposed metal that's then subjected to weathering processes, the effects of the elements, wind, rain, sunlight, and of course the surface is constantly changing, as is illustrated with the two images here of Shoreline 1 and Shoreline 2, which are 3 months apart. So,
all right, to touch on Shoreline 1, which has as an extra, really, a somewhat helmeted-like, long-nosed portrait with an eye here, a very pointed nose, with a lovely blue behind it, and surrounded by a sandy effect. So I had to call it Shoreline. This did seem to have a lovely deep blue that you'll get close to shore sometimes. And one looked really close, so you could see mussels or little sea creatures or limpets holding on to the rocks of the shoreline.
Or at a different resolution, for me, it's a shoreline as viewed from a satellite imagery.
Oh, yeah,
so
I see, yes.
These would be coral reefs.
Do you know, I didn't see that. Again, you've brought up a new idea.
For me, that's very evocative of some of the satellite imagery I've seen, which in fact depicts shorelines just like that. And what you're seeing here would be the coral reef going out into the deeper ocean, coming into the sandy interior.
Curiously enough, you'd say that. I did see that in what I call stage 2 of the same site, because this did seem to be much more satellite view, a very high view of what I could only call Arabia or the Middle East.
Yes.
Because it seemed to be burnt up. But if one looks closely, there's a faint indication of the face that lies here.
And the face is the reference point.
Yes. Now, why did that change into that? I'll have to explain that I took this 3 months later than this one. So weathering had taken over. A lot of rain over those 3 months, and oxidization or rust has taken over. So the coolness of the water here and the warmth of the sand, which I associated to a particular beach at South Wales, has moved to somewhere I didn't recognise. It was much too hot. And this seemed like an inland sea. It could be the Mediterranean if you view it from a satellite. It has that feeling of being, or the Aegean with lots of small islands, and a vast sandy, not a beach any longer, but a continent.
Yes, yes.
So I think that's how...
Now, we've just had a good look at your Turner piece, Chris, which of course has the theme of water in it. If we walk across to the other side of the exhibition, there's another piece here which you could say develops out of the fire, or the inferno, but which has a representation of another major art movement. And we could call this an impressionist, if you like, picture. It's one of my favourite, actually. You've titled it Harvest, and I really do think that could pass as a wonderful impressionist image of a harvest.
Well, I had, after the word harvest, in parentheses, written after Monet, because we were in that area. He has some of this streakiness and loose use of paints did suggest Monet, but I was trying to keep away from that slightly. But other people have suggested not only is it like a harvest with a line representing the edge, there's also a woodland going in with fire beginning to catch.
Yes, I see that now.
And here we have the contrast between water from the Turner to this harvesting, water, fire. We moved into heat, full heat, and we have a number of pictures we have this quality about them.
Before we look at the next one, I'd just like to comment on how you've very skillfully been able to use a physical feature of the metal, and that's this line going across, which for many people would be a distraction, but you've managed to actually position the image so that it actually becomes an integral part of the image.
Yes. The problem is, of course, with all car doors, to strengthen it, we have to put a fold in the metal. Here we have it. And here we have it, obviously. It's very hard. You cannot avoid it. So we have to turn it into something. So it did seem a natural end to the harvest line, and it's also a good proportion on pictures, something known as the golden section, which I don't think we ought to dealt with here, but there is an ideal proportion between a lesser and a greater part on a flat plane, and I chose that rather
It's been incorporated to very great effect into that image.
Yes.
However, let's pick back up on the...
Well, I'd like to move then to one I call Figure in the Flames, which is from the same vehicle.
And indeed has the same line in it. This is clearly at a different resolution.
Yes, well, we have a double image here because I'd taken out one of the lines, had it less. And that is, the other picture is rather closer, a close-up. This is a little further back. What intrigued me about this image was the shadow, a very dark piece that was left out as if the flames hadn't got to it. And the running down of rust after the event doesn't look like rust, it looks like fire rain pouring down the side, getting hotter and hotter as it comes to the right-hand side. And we have this extraordinary little image. Now, I've had different views of what this image is. For me, it was feline. I saw a nose here and an eye, and what to me looked like an ear, so it suggested cat with a shoulder. I'll repeat that, not a shoulder, but a collar to a high coat, shoulder line to the elbow, leaning towards the right, on his left arm. Now, other people have seen an image this way with a short nose and a very long chin.
Yes.
And the face looking up.
And there's yet a third way, of course, because there's in fact a double face on there. You could say there's a face here, which is
Yes,
a rather
that's the face
humanoid
I
face,
was
and then there's a rather more flattened face here, with a nose and two eyes and a mouth, and sticking up hair around the side. So it's almost like there are two faces together there. So there are many ways of looking at that.
Well, you've given me a new image. I didn't know that one existed.
But of course, this again, I think, is one of the most powerful images in the exhibition, because it's also evocative of something else. This figure is such a powerful figure in its own right, no matter how you view that image, that you'd actually, I think on one occasion, suggested that this could actually be representative of a pyromaniac. It's rather sinister.
It's the arsonist himself, yes.
Yes.
It could be me in my moment of anger, you see. This is the rage all around me. So another mirror image, rather one removed from the one we were talking about down here.
Yes.
Totally different feeling about it. But whilst we're on to the area of heat, I would like to touch on one other picture, which is across here, Pat, which I called Veronica's Veil.
Yes.
Originally, I called it a fiery furnace, because it seemed to me a blaze. It's certainly the hottest picture in terms of paint, because if you mix white with pale oranges and deep reds, and you have a cool surround in certain areas, it looks absolutely ablaze, the fiery furnace. But then I noticed an extraordinary thing. We move into religious iconography. A line of rivets were brought out by the fire on two levels across here. This really did suggest the top of a head, because there's an eye here, if we look carefully, and another eye here, and a nose which looks as though it's been broken.
Yes.
And then two lines here representing teeth. So suddenly we have a face, a rather horrific face, set on something that could be seen as a piece of material hanging. Cloth. Now, if we really look at it like that, we suddenly move towards a biblical subject matter, where Veronica, on the road to Calvary, out of compassion for the fallen Christ, puts the veil over Christ's head, and the image is taken off it. And it's known as the Veronica's Veil, quite a well-known one. It did suggest a face in agony.
I must admit, I've always found that one difficult to see there, what you are.
Yes, it's a very personal image to me.
I think it is indeed very personal.
As a religious person, it's just something that reminded me of something from the past. And there's certainly a face there, and others have seen it. It's as if he has suffered a lot. Mm. Well, fire.
Let's move across just a little to take in a view of what these cars actually look like again, just to remind ourselves, and to set up the next image, in fact, because I think we're going to look at the detail that you've actually picked out on this bonnet.
Right, the bonnet of this car here, which originally was a Subaru Impreza, which means very little to me, but the garage owner assured me that's what it was. What was interesting about this bonnet was a certain amount of the front had been left alone by the fire. The original paintwork, for some reason, had not been attacked. The fire must have blown itself out. But it did leave a lot of white at one end, and then a black area, and then the red of the unburnt enamel. I took another view of it. I stood up high on the bank and looked down and came up with a very surprising image, which is further along this wall. And here it is.
Which you call global warming.
I called it global warming. Here's the front of the bonnet around here, and just see a slight curve to it. The whiteness here, and something happening in the middle. And let's look at it as if it were a realistic picture for a minute. We're above, we're in the satellite position again, or in a plane looking down. Cloud. It's forming over a landscape, but an icy landscape. Here we've got ragged and rounded forms. The ice is beginning to break up. And here, a very, very hot sea coming in. I felt it could only be called global warming. It seemed appropriate.
It's one of the most powerful images in the exhibition in terms of the contrast, isn't it, between the colours, the hot and the cold there.
Yes, I'm not sure about cold, but certainly very hot to something very neutral and quiet. Yes, but you bring up the word cold, which would take us over to something that is cold or cool, certainly.
And perhaps one of the most abstract of the pieces.
Yes, certainly. Or some people see it as the chest. Others see it as a series of dots of all sizes, with very small, tiny dots, and slowly bigger ones and very large ones. But you can also see hints of a cloud formation and some curtaining, and possibly whatever else you choose to see.
Is this from the same car, Chris? Is this image from the car that you've just...
Yes, it is. It's on the side door. So that's also extraordinary. There's no hint of warmth whatever. And so I thought cool centre would...
Yes. Now there are a number of other images which have got this sort of cool thing running through them.
And they came from the car. There's one over here called, well, there's the one...
Two here. It's Cold Front and Amoeba.
Let's take Cold Front for a start. This again could be seen as a satellite view. The weather front coming in, moving across. Some people can see it as a very large skull. Mouth, eye, back of the skull here. So it's a still life, if you like. Or it's cloud formation moving across. Or it's a snowy continent surrounded by dark seas. You take your pick.
Well, for me, the power of this image is the transition from the dark to the light, with the transition zones, these wonderful zones of colour you can see rippling through on top of the image. That, for me, gives it its power. It gives it almost a sort of three-dimensionality.
Notice one other thing also, Pat, that it's a door again, and here's a place where the lock might have been. You notice
that line again.
The panel running through. It doesn't obtrude in the way it did on the other, which is quite useful. Nice one. Next door to it, another image, which is rather sinister. I couldn't decide quite what it was, but it seemed to be rather obese, and it was moving as if it was swelling. It didn't seem to be still. It was on the move. It was a greedy object, and it had a mouth, and it had an eye. No trickery here. I didn't add anything to it, but it seemed to be eating its way. It was an amoeba, something that is single and about to expand and grow, and isn't it growing? And isn't it grotesque? And also, one other image, just along the top of it, there's a hint of something else lying just at the top of this head. I want to look at that just for a moment. Just notice there's a little thing that could be an eye. Now, I'm going to take a new camera angle on this, and we'll move across to the other side of the exhibition, over here. And here is amoeba, again, stretched out, and this is what we found at the top, and we'll find there's a face here with its mouth open. The amoeba figure has extended this way, and there's a hint of another face in this direction, and there's something a little odd over here. I had to call it nightmare. It was a rather frightening image, and I didn't have a nightmare like this, but it did suggest something of that nature. Notice we're still in the cool range of
indeed we are.
Tones and colours.
And what a contrast with the fire of Veronica's
Absolutely.
veil next to it.
If we look at these two, we've got the
just,
ultimate.
we could just very briefly pick up this one underneath it, which, although it's not part of the thing we're discussing at the moment, nevertheless it's an extremely powerful image for a completely different reason. And that is because of the shape, the very finely chiselled shape, which could only be a raptor's.
Yes, very much the beak of the raptor, the buzzard, the eagle, the beak cutting in, the slit here.
And how the black really brings that out, doesn't it? It's the black that makes that gives that image its quality.
Absolutely, yes. And metal twisted and burnt by fire with many kinds of texture. This is really exciting, some of the textures between this, and then the smoother golden flow here. There's a lot going on in that picture.
I'd like to move us back across, Chris, to into the imagery again, where we're beginning to see human forms. And we looked and discussed, looked at this one and discussed the figure in the flames and the many ways in which you could actually pick out different figures in here.
Yeah.
If we move across now to another figure, this I think leads us very nicely into the way in which you have ideas about developing the photography and in fact blending it back into the conventional artwork or the mixed media work that you're used to working with. Here we have if you like, part of an image which is ready-made, but the other part of it needs some work doing on it to actually bring out the qualities of the piece that you want to demonstrate. So could you...
Yes, Pat, we were talking about this earlier, that the fact that I saw this as an eyeball with the pupil there, very sharp, the nose, and a hint of a mouth and a beard, and a very broken skin. It's a rather horrific piece, really, as if the epidermis has been stripped off the figure and he's looking at the fire that has caused this to happen, perhaps behind a possible doorway. Notice one other thing, as we're moving away from that, these two lines. This is the door turned on its side.
Yeah.
The two supporting.
And now you're proposing to use those two lines again to very good effect and to actually modify this section.
I intend to darken this very slightly
so
he
more
really
like
is looking
yes.
round at the side of a doorway.
And it'll be very interesting to see how that does actually develop, because one can visualise that transformation.
Yes.
But there are many ways in which that transformation could be made, I guess. So presumably at some point you'll have a number of different versions of this, I would imagine.
Show that at a later
yes.
date, yes.
Yes.
Because many of these things are ongoing, transforming.
Yes. But we do actually have in the exhibition one example where you've done just that. You've taken one of the images and you've developed it through into a fully formed, recognisable image incorporating quite a lot of sort of mythological detail. And it starts with this. This is our first piece, isn't it? Taken from the actual bodywork of the car. It's the photograph.
This is one of the last cars, and may I go just back right across the other side for a moment? I know it's rather awkward, but across here we have the vehicle that was the source of a lot of interesting later material. It's the penultimate car. Again, we're on the bonnet, which is the biggest piece of metal on the car, usually. Sometimes the roof is big, but it often has a panel which prevents it. But this is a big site. If we look carefully at the darkness there and the whiteness round it, that is the picture I called later Carnivale. And this little bit that protrudes and sticks slightly over the bonnet, over the grille, has a very interesting shape and form, which we'll deal with. So we'll go back to that one, which I call Carnivale, which is after the carnival in Venice, where masks are worn, which are often black or white and have slit-like eyes. And it was this particular figure that suggested that title, these narrow slot-like things. And there's a lot of interesting imagery in this. The white forms, here. The extreme contrast of black here, with a big eye hole, pair of ears, as I saw it, another face, and most intriguingly of all, this form down here. It didn't take me long to spot what it was, but very few people had seen it. So if we could just concentrate the film on this shape for a moment, see if anyone could spot what it might be.
I have to confess, I can't.
You can't?
So...
Well, we'll now move on to what I developed from that one. Is that a... Shall I put it just there?
Yes,
how's
hold
that?
It and you can talk it.
No, let's talk it through. This image.
Yes, now it becomes apparent, you see, once you point it out.
There did seem to be a large nose here, so I haven't touched that. I've left that alone. A neck, and obviously a costume of sorts. Here it is, untouched. A leg, possibly a leg that way, but nothing linking that across. So what I decided to do, not in this one, but in the next one, was to link the two across. So This has now become, because I put a crown on it, or a pair of horns, it's become, let's say, Merlin, or any figure of alchemy or magic you care to name, it seemed. Then I found another attractive little form, which I didn't spot immediately, but I noticed had a slight bulge here, and a hint of a leg, so I thought, it has to be a bird. Now I gave the bird an arm running towards the creature on this side, in the original one. Rather, I didn't give it, it was already in the photograph. But here I linked it up and made it more obvious. And the pair of ears here, I turned into a Cheshire cat.
And it's interesting because now you make that connection, I can see the smile here. But at first I couldn't see it.
It's just vaguely there, isn't it?
Well, it's a perfect Cheshire cat smile. One moment it's there and the next moment it isn't.
It's hinted as that already. And then last but not least, of course, is this dark form across here. Well, it's not the last, actually, but it's one of the last forms. There's obviously a backside and something projecting, which suggests a back limb, something here. Not all that clear, but it became a bear leaning forward. But close to this bear were two very intriguing forms, figure here and a figure here. Now one has to look a little more carefully here, but I saw that as a back of a neckerchief around a rather amusing face. There's an eye, a nose, and possibly a costume, and an arm coming out. And here a smaller figure with a big hat, a beard maybe, and a striding back leg. So the two together became a pair of dancers, just visible, hadn't tinkered with it very much. A couple of Russian peasants in a round dance, possibly. And then most interesting of all were the two background figures. Here it wasn't very well defined, but I decided to separate those out and make a little more of this. It did seem there was a figure here with a leg, so it could be a horse. So a horse it became of sorts. I gave it a tail. And this side, a long floating figure, reminiscent perhaps of a picture you may have seen by Picasso coming out of the Guernica.
Yes.
And I've given it a little face at the far side. I've added a moon.
One important question, I think, is the extent to which the definition that you've created now in this picture is dependent upon colour changes that you've introduced.
That's also interesting, isn't it? This is much redder as a print. And here, now the reason for that is because I had a photocopy made of this, which tended towards yellow. And I painted on top with a gouache paint using that same yellow. Now I'd like to take this picture one stage further, and I should add, it's called, I've given it the title, Variations on Carnivali, this one, for my granddaughter. And it did seem to have, or enter into the realm of fairy tale, or nursery rhyme, and she was very young.
So now we go into another transformation.
Now this is the next stage on, with a little addition on this side. That's where it ended before, with this little face, you remember? I've just taken a little bit more of this print and stuck it on the end. So the bear has now moved centre stage, so to speak. And you'll probably notice another change. I've given Merlin a right arm, so it now links in to this, and he's pointing down towards the bear. The bird is still in its correct place.
And in fact, the rudiments of the arm are in the original.
Yes, they're already there. The lower part hasn't changed. So all I had to do is make a link across there. I modified the helmet or the headpiece of Merlin a little bit here. And I put my granddaughter in on this side with big eyes, with a hint of a smile, and lots of intriguing snake-like forms coming on that side. Again, I mentioned the granddaughter. There's one final follow-on from this, which is, again, not for a granddaughter, but for a friend's child, a grandchild, who was born a couple of months ago. And here is much more jolly. This is an etching, a coloured etching, and it's for the child's nursery. And I put Edward, that's his name, on the bear. And he's got a smile on his face. And he's been welcomed by Merlin. The title is Merlin Welcomes Young Edward. It's quite appropriate. The Cheshire Cat's on black, and we have a nice array of plant forms over here. I've introduced another bird at the end of the bird there. And so we've got, and the two Russian dancers have become much more prominent. And I think the horse is seen to be dancing and prancing. And there seems to be, interestingly enough, another figure that's been made out of the other two. The two mouths become the ears of another figure with two eyes, and a little mouth here. So this is another transformative effect. This changing thing is always going on.
And it's taken us, in one sense, full circle, because it's brought us back to your starting point, which is the mixed media artwork that you were working on before you had, if you like, this diversion, this creative diversion into the creative photography.
Right, yes, that's a good point, actually, Patrick.
I wonder if, Chris, just by way of finishing off our discussion, if we just look back through the exhibition. Many people looking at this exhibition will think that they're looking at the work of a professional photographer, somebody with really well-refined technical skills in photography, with a lot of expensive equipment.
Yeah.
Just tell us about your technical skills in photography and the equipment that you used in producing these images.
A Canon, it's a 217, I think, because I'm not a professional photographer. I use ordinary film, so these are straight photographs enlarged to their maximum, so it's all 35mm. The exception being the large leaping Lascaux leap and the Homage to Turner, which are digitally recorded, pixelated.
Yes.
So,
any lenses? Any particular lenses?
I don't know. The answer is I don't know.
So whatever lens is on the camera is what you use.
I have no idea.
And what about use of a tripod to get absolute?
No.
So this is a handheld camera with
Yes.
whatever lens is on it.
I did use a high definition film because I thought that would give me a sharper image, which it did.
Yes.
But that's only because I read the package and it said high definition.
So the message really is that anybody with the eye for this work can actually go out and do this sort of thing.
Yes, you have to have a sense of composition. You have to
yes, that's
have
become
to
very apparent.
You have to
as
trim.
You've shown some of these images.
I've cut the cover, I've cut the bonnet off away from that. I've cut the car door away from something else. I think we could round it off by talking about the final image in the show, right at the end, because this is quite important. This is car number 3 in its absence, let's say. This is where car number 3 stood. There's its remains. Some little bits of junk left over. The strange thing was, when this was pulled off the site, lying down, very briefly, was a piece of wood, I thought. And within a few days, because I walked this hill regularly, it started to come up. So obviously, despite all the heat, it had survived. If one looks closely, you'll see the bark is torn, and you'll see the ends of the branches, the smaller branches, are badly seared and burnt. Now that was a year and a half ago. It's now in full leaf, and the first blossoms have appeared. So it had to be called resurrection, I felt. I'm sorry, I had to use a religious image again. But it did seem to round out the sequence. Yes. We started off with chaos and fire and burning. We end up with something that's affirmative.
It's a very good way to end the discussion. However, I'm not going to let you get away with completely without having to answer the question that all artists hate being asked, and that is if there was one image in this exhibition that you would want to retain. In other words, your favourite image, what would it be? If there's one here that you think really captures, if you like, the essence of the work that you do, or simply because you like it for the qualities that it has, what would be the image?
That's a typical one, isn't it? I'd like to compromise and say that I'd have to choose 2. one which made the mood swing from anger to something much other. I called it euphoria, which was the leaping deer.
Yes.
Lascaux Leap was what set me on the course of some sense of hope out of this despair. And the other, which we hadn't touched on, but I think we should, came off the bonnet of the car which had the wave. And this was an extraordinary image for me. And this is quite a small version. I do have a bigger version of it. What's extraordinary is the blackness beneath. And for me, this represented the shape of a globe. Let's call it the Earth, as seen from afar again. And there's a chain of islands. And beyond, an apocalyptic sky, something rather awesome has happened. Now this was during the Gulf War. And I had to relate it to something that was happening outside this inner experience, which is referring to something that disturbed me considerably. And I saw the blackness as a lake of oil, or a leak that had covered the earth, except for a few islands were remaining. And there were other images in that were even more disturbing, a shadow image here, a white one, which moved on to one there. Now, I shouldn't go beyond these two we talked about, but there was a hint of something rather dark and sinister there.
The desert island discs, and you've got...
But let's keep to this. This is the second one that was of some importance. Yeah. So I'd say, Patrick, that those are two...
I think, in fact, a good place to end the show. And perhaps we ought just to move around again and finish with the final image back on our Lascaux.
Right.
Our bit of Paleolithic in the 21st century.
Sorry?
Paleolithic in the 21st century.
Well, if we're talking about Paleolithic, I think we ought to move to one which we left out, which is called Paleolithic, which is a good one, actually, because it's full of transformations. And we missed out this because one or two people took it up, but it's a very good image. It's full of fascination. It's just like a wall painting. Some people say it's a horse, other people say it's a rabbit, others see certain sea creatures in it. I'm not sure, but it's certainly Paleolithic, and it's certainly a painting off the wall. So that was another attraction.
Yes, I like that. It could be the remains of a medieval wall painting, couldn't it?
Yes, it's certainly about painting anyway, which is my subject, really.
Yeah. Well, it's a very difficult interview to end, Chris, because every time we think we've come to an end, we find another trigger point to move on to another image. But I think we've covered most of them, but not all of them. Yeah. And it's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Oh, thanks for asking questions.